You are listening to ESL Talk, a podcast made for English teachers by English teachers.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of ESL Talk. I'm Daniel.
And I'm Faye.
In today's episode, we're going to cover the topic of teaching certifications, licensing, and qualifications you might need to teach ESL, either online or in a school.
Yes, and our guest today, Carina, is a very experienced teacher trainer here in Canada. So she's going to be able to share some insights about what the different qualifications are and what you might need to get.
Yeah, it's a really common question that we hear a lot. And I think it's very important that teachers know what certifications and what qualifications they might need. In our journeys, both as native and non-native teachers, we've had to obtain a lot of different qualifications and certifications to improve our English teaching abilities. So, Faye, when it comes to your teaching certifications and qualifications, can you tell me a little bit about the process you've gone through so far?
Yeah, I mean, for me, as you mentioned, as a non-native English teacher, it's been a little bit different. I started out teaching in Brazil and no qualification was needed there, really. I can't really say what it's like right now because it's been over 10 years. But at the time, if you could speak the language fluently, basically you could teach it. So a few years later, when I moved to Canada, I enrolled in a TESOL diploma program, which is basically here, it's considered one level above a certificate, a TESOL certificate. So in the end, that diploma took me longer than I expected. And I ended up taking the 1 month certificate while I was doing the diploma, just so I could get back into teaching more quickly. I was actually had a job prospect and they said, oh, we'll wait till you're done. So I'm like, well, let's speed things up then. So I ended up getting both. And then finally, a few years later, I went for the master's degree through the University of Leicester, which is coincidentally, I believe, the same one you did.
Yes.
Spoiler alert for our listeners. And I completed that in 2017, I believe.
As did I. Yeah. So there we go. We were probably in the same intake and we had no idea.
Right. We could have been. What was your journey like? Was it slightly different? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Initially my interest was in teaching, but it was more in sports and physical education side. So I really wanted to be a sports and a PE teacher. That was my kind of goal when I was young.
That's interesting because I did a design bachelor's degree as well. So we both started out not in that field.
Yeah. So my kind of background, it was still teaching, but it was more physical education and sports teaching. And I played a lot of football or soccer, depending where we are in the world, coached a lot of that. And I really enjoyed that. But sadly, what was happening at that time is that there was a change in the government around 2010 in the UK, and the Olympics were in London as well in 2012. Yeah. So there's a lot of funding and a lot of effort put into recruiting and retaining a lot of sports and PE teachers. Unfortunately, the government changed and the new government didn't want to fund that anymore. And that led to a huge surplus of PE and sports teachers. So I thought, well, you know what, let's go travel, let's go explore, let's try a new adventure. So I went out to South Korea to teach English there. I did complete a TESOL certificate before. Wasn't anything, advanced or major, but once I was out in Korea, I kind of realized that I need to improve my skills, improve my understanding and my, pedagogy when it came to teaching English. So I did first did the TESOL certification, and then I applied for the master's, in TESOL and Applied Linguistics at the University of Leicester, the same as yourself, Faye. Started that whilst I was in Korea and then came back to the UK, completed that. I then did a PGC, which is a teaching certification in English as well. So I had those kind of two certifications there, those two master's level certifications there. And then when I moved to Canada, I did the TESOL diploma as well, like yourself, to kind of enhance my qualifications and bring me up kind of to where I needed to be. And then, as we mentioned in a previous episode, we have the different standards or the different levels in Canada. So now we're both at level 3 standard, and I think that's a really good place to be. And I think it was just the case that if I'm going to teach something, I want to be able to do it well, and I want to have the fundamental knowledge and the skills and the techniques as well. So that's a little bit about my motivation. Faye, what was your motivation to obtain these qualifications? Was it for your own development or because of work?
I feel like we had different but very similar journeys in the sense of why we felt the need to get the qualifications we did. Like when I moved to Canada, firstly, I felt like I really had to prove myself as a non-native teacher, which is kind of sad looking back. And I know a lot of non-native teachers feel that way. If you're listening to us, you shouldn't. That should not be what defines you as a teacher. But I felt the need to prove myself. So I decided to get the diploma instead of the certificate right off the bat. And I ended up having to get the certificate anyway for practical reasons in that case. But then when I got my master's, just like you said, I kind of felt like I lacked that theoretical base to back up my teaching, right? And my bachelor's degree was in something completely unrelated. So I really wanted to feel more confident in what I was doing. And I also looked at the job prospects here in Canada. If you wanted to teach in a college or university, you had to have a master's, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you still do have to have a master's level
Right.
of education. So yeah, that was kind of like my motivation, was both to feel more confident in what I was doing and also to improve my career prospects, at least here. And the distance degree really helped also with the flexibility, because I was already working full time at the time. And I believe you were too in Korea, right? So it kind of helps to kind of make your own schedule for your study time.
Absolutely.
But you were teaching in Korea and then in the UK and in Canada. Was that kind of the same for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a little bit of a prerequisite to start, because obviously going to Korea, the requirements were basically you had to be a native speaker, which is still a little bit, I don't really know if that's the best way to recruit good teachers, but that was one requirement. As long as you had a bachelor's and you completed a TESOL certification, then you were good to go. So initially it was just kind of to tick those boxes and to have a little bit of a grounding, a little bit of a foundation to start from. But then once I realized that teaching English was something I really enjoyed and something that I thought I could pursue, then I obviously started the master's. When I came back to the UK, I continued that, and I didn't need the master's, but it was just really helpful and really, it was kind of a statement of, this is the path that I'm going down now. I can support that with my PGC, which is my teaching certification. So I'm qualified at teaching it, as well as having all the theoretical knowledge as well. And then moving to Canada, again, like you said, for most, not all, but most universities or higher education institutes, you would need a master's kind of just to kind of get yourself through the door, so to speak. And then having that TESOL diploma on top of that, I think it's just another way to kind of make you stand out from the crowd, because especially when it comes to the field of English teaching, we're in a very competitive market and there's a lot of people doing this. So whatever you can do to differentiate yourself and to help you have a little bit of an edge and have a little bit more knowledge is really helpful as well. So that's kind of how they've got me to where I am today. But how have your qualifications and educational background helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, well, like I said, the certificate was required basically for me to get my first ESL teaching job in Canada. They actually said, we'll wait till you're done to hire you, because if you want to teach in Canada, if you want to teach at an accredited school, which is basically accredited by Languages Canada, that kind of oversees these language schools, you have to have at least a certificate. Then later, after I completed my diploma, that made me qualified to teach the same TESOL certificate program that I took, because it was a level 2 certification or degree. And then that would allowed me to teach level 1. And then in that same school, they had a TESOL program, and I actually was able to become a teacher trainer having done that. And then finally with the master's, I was able to get a job at a college teaching EAP, so English for Academic Purposes. So all of the certifications and qualifications I got definitely had some effect on the jobs I got and all the variety of experiences I've had, right?
And I think I would say that, if they are required for a job, don't just try to do every single course that's out there. Make sure that it serves a purpose and it's going to help you get to where you are. But obviously, when you are doing that study, make the most of it and try to take out and extract everything that you can to help you.
Absolutely.
Again, on this topic of qualifications and having the right qualifications, like we've both touched upon, why is it important for online ESL teachers to be qualified and have good qualifications to support them? Because I'm sure you, like me, we see all these job postings and it seems like the barriers are very low, but Does that translate to good teaching? I'm not so sure. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, I can only speak from personal experience, but as someone who started teaching in a very unregulated environment in Brazil, in my case, it was very similar, I feel, to the online teaching setting nowadays. It's basically I'm a native speaker or I'm a very fluid speaker and I can teach it, right? So for me personally, it was very difficult at the beginning. I really kind of felt like a fraud at first because, I mean, I was young and inexperienced, but also I had no idea where to start. And they basically threw me in the classroom with a course book and you're like, I'm just going to wing it. And it's interesting that, right. And that is a huge thing. I always told my trainees, fake it till you make it, obviously, always. But because it's acting, right? Teaching is acting. If you act confident, your students will believe you are. But also, it's interesting that a few years ago, I went back to Brazil to visit family and I found a little notebook with all my lesson plans from when I started teaching. And I was horrified. I did so many of the things that I always told my trainees never to do. And I don't have any memory of being a bad teacher myself. You know, it's like you don't remember really how well or badly you taught, but I could see looking back, I'm like, yeah, I definitely have become a better teacher as a result of my qualifications now. Experience as well, but I think a lot of things really helped me get to where I am, and all of the the training I've done helped. And you're basically going in blind if you don't have that. So I do think it's not necessary to get that qualification, but it's definitely advisable in my opinion.
Yeah.
What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah. So I'll try to apply this to the context that I think might be useful for our listeners of that. I do teach independently on a teaching platform online. And there's thousands and thousands of English teachers. And a lot of them always say, I try to contribute to the community, to the forum, and we get into a lot of discussion. And it's a lot of how can I make more money? How can I get more students? How can I attract more students? Are they going to judge me if I'm not a native speaker? And I always say that, and even for me, looking back, like you said, going back to my first lessons, I think, what was I doing? I had no idea. And, the expression that comes to mind is, you don't know what you don't know. And what I'm trying to say by that is, when you're at the bottom, you kind of think of like a pyramid. We're at the bottom level and there's everyone there, there's everything going on. And there's just this kind of mass of everyone on the same level, the same kind of entry point. But the more you climb that ladder, the more you get your your TESOL certification, and then maybe you do a master's, and then maybe you do a Delta or a CELTA, and you keep climbing up there. The clearer things become, the more you can see, the more you can structure things and plan things and put together lessons and teach in a way that's going to connect with your learners, because a lot of teaching is making a connection with the learner, helping them see the value of what you're teaching them and helping them connect it to themselves. And that takes time, that takes patience, that takes knowledge, that takes learning. Obviously you need to have some natural abilities, and a lot of teachers are wonderful at doing that. And just because you have all these qualifications doesn't mean you're an amazing teacher, right? Because I've seen it on both sides. So I think it's a combination of having the right knowledge and having the right experience and putting those together. And as you go by and slowly start to put the pieces together, then that will help you to be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned this a little bit, but do you think having those qualifications reflect on how quickly your students achieve their goal? Do you think that's a direct effect?
If I know about an area really well, and I'm teaching that area every day, and I'm reading about that area and researching it and teaching it and going in this cycle continuously, then my efficiency, my effectiveness is going to improve. And I've mentioned this 1,000 times in lots of our episodes, but feedback is crucial. It's not always easy if you're teaching by yourself. Maybe you're teaching online, but get feedback from a peer, get feedback from a friend, even if it's someone who isn't a teacher, and ask them, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about this activity? Would you enjoy this? And getting feedback from the students. I sometimes throw off my students and they get a little bit confused, or they think it's some kind of trick or something. When I kind of ask them, so how do you feel about your learning, or what would you like to do more of, or what's working for you, what isn't working for you? Because I think that's a really crucial element. And if you have the knowledge and the skills and the experience, then you can easily tweak things and adapt things so that you're more effective. So that would be my advice, I think.
Yeah, and that's something I believe qualifications help you get is that self-awareness for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're just getting started with today's discussion on qualifications and teaching certifications. So we're going to move on to our interview for today and welcome our guest Carina to the podcast. Hello, Carina. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to participate.
Yeah, it's great to have you, and we're really excited for our talk. So why don't we start by you briefly telling us a little bit about your teaching journey so far?
Okay, so I've been teaching for 27 years now. Don't try to guess my age. I started very young as a sub teacher for school subjects. And once you start teaching, you just fall in love with it. And that's what happened to me. Then when I was doing my degree, I started teaching English because I am passionate about the language and also because I wanted to have a job. That was my first thought. I want to have a job and let's try teaching English. And then I fell in love with teaching the English language. And while I was doing my degree, I started doing a TDC in Brazil that is called a Teachers Development Course. And after I finished this course, I was hired by the school as an English teacher. And I taught in different contexts in regular schools and language schools. And then when I moved to Canada, I took my TESOL course and I taught international students. So I have experience in different contexts with different levels and also different age groups.
Great. And could you tell us a little bit more about how you got into more the teacher training side of things?
When I moved to Vancouver and I took the TESOL course, I noticed that one of the classrooms, the students were having an extension of the program that was a young learner program. And one of the things that I love the most is teaching kids. So I got very interested in that program. And I felt like joining, but not as a student, as a teacher, because I hold a Bachelor in Education and teaching very young learners post-graduation course, the certification. So I felt like, I want to join. I want to teach kids. I want to show what I can do. I want to share. And then as soon as I had the opportunity to do it at school, I offered myself. I told the director of studies at the school about my certification, about my interest, and then I started teaching the young learners training program. And after I had some experience training the students to teach kids, I thought to myself, well, if I can't do this, why can't I teach the trainees how to teach English as well? And then I went and looked for some information about how to become a trainer. I did some training sessions, shadowing, and then that's when they suggested the Delta course. And then I simply love it.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that journey. It sounds like you've had a real blend of ages and types of teaching. So it's always great to, try to teach as many different ages and abilities as possible. I think it really adds to your teaching ability. So while we're talking about certifications and qualifications, Carina, why is it more important than ever for teachers to be well qualified, especially when it comes to teaching English effectively?
In my experience, because when I started teaching English, I want to have a job and I like English. Why not teach English, right? And I noticed that with all the training courses that I have taken, it raises awareness. So after teaching, I have experience. Now I want a certification. You're able to compare your old attitudes and your new attitudes toward your students' learning process. Why are you teaching what you're teaching, the way you're teaching? So all the why questions came to me. Why do you do this first? Why do you do this second? Why do you do this third? What happens if you mix the order? So when I did my TESOL certification here in Canada, I came with the feeling like I'm a very experienced teacher and it's going to be a piece of cake. But then it wasn't. It was hard. It was tough for me to open my mind to the structure itself. And like, oh, but I do this when I'm teaching, but now I know why. Mm-hmm. I know why I do this. And I know how important it is to have a focus. And I know how important it is to do things in a certain order, in a logical order. Mm-hmm. It's important to have an aim for your lessons, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you've touched on a very important point there, is that a lot of teachers don't always reflect or ask themselves those questions. And a really important part of improving and learning more as a teacher is being reflective, being able to assess your teaching, what went well, maybe what didn't go well. So I definitely would be an advocate of that approach and asking all those W questions for sure as well.
Yeah, even like you said, as an experienced teacher, even like going back and thinking about how you teach is very valuable. Mm-hmm. But what do you think are some potential problems with non-qualified or non-certified teachers when they're teaching ESL? Just like you started out without a qualification. What do you think could be some problems that other people might have if they do the same?
I can think about the students the trainees that I've had mm-hmm. That have no experience. Mm-hmm. And for example, the way you respond to your students' responses, the way you give them feedback, mm-hmm. right? Appropriate ways of giving feedback depending on your aim for that task. So why are you doing the speaking task? What are you trying to help your students with? Is it accuracy? Is it fluency? If it's fluency, you can't stop them mm-hmm. every time they make a mistake. So how do you give feedback? How do you react? I'd say, how do you react to your students' mistakes? And also the focus. When you're working with certain skills, as listening or reading, the receptive skills, how do you start? Are you following the course book? The course book guides you. But if you're preparing some classes with authentic materials, if you want to use a newspaper mm-hmm. article, how do you plan the lesson? What is the structure for a reading lesson? What mm-hmm. do you do first? So I feel like if you don't have this knowledge, if you're not certified, if you haven't done any training, you would be lost. Yeah. And you might end up frustrated because your students were not able to do the tasks. Mm-hmm. And the students will be frustrated, like, oh, right. Like, I can't do this. And in the end,
it kind of snowballs, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There's, I think a lot of teachers just assume, well, I can speak English well, so I can probably teach mm-hmm. English well. And those, doesn't always translate that way. So I think
No.
it's really important to be aware of those things when you're getting started. So, for teachers that are getting started, or maybe they're thinking about teaching English for the first time, what would be the first step or the first steps that they can take in order to get those qualifications or certifications?
I highly recommend going for a TESOL certification or a CELTA certification. Both the TESOL and the TESOL are level 1 certification. So they're for students, for teachers or trainees who have no experience in teaching or little experience in teaching. And they will, at the same time as they learn about how to teach certain skills and systems of the language, they can also practice. And then they get feedback from the tutor. So it's a very intensive, but a very helpful course. So I would highly recommend, even if you have a degree in teaching a language, I think that a TESOL or a CELTA course is very helpful, as it raises your awareness on so many important aspects when teaching a class.
Yeah, and you touched on that. So in Canada, at least, we know that, as you said, a TESOL certificate and a CELTA are both level 1, kind of similar ideas. Now, does it matter what kind of TESOL certificate you get? Because there are lots out there, right? A lot of different kinds of TESOL certificates floating around. So does it matter? Is there anything in particular that you should avoid or look for in a TESOL certificate?
So I'd say look for one course that is accredited. So if you want to go for a TESOL course, go to Languages Canada website if you want to teach in Canada, and look for a course that is recognized by Languages Canada. And also, I would highly recommend a course that has a practicum component. Because some courses are theoretical and you just go and study and then you go and apply what you have learned. But how do you know if you're applying it correctly? You're not able to, it's really hard to notice what you're doing, to reflect on what you're doing while you are doing. So it's always good to have somebody to observe, to give you some feedback, someone you can talk to. So that's why I think that having the practicum component is 50% of it, because you will have a trainer, you will be observed, you will have feedback from your trainer, you'll be able to reflect and change things. So I'd say accreditation and practicum.
Okay. And I guess that's also good for our listeners that are not in Canada. I'm sure you can find out what the requirements are for getting accredited in your country, right? Something like Languages Canada probably exists, especially in English-speaking countries.
Yes, for sure.
And can you now tell us a little bit about the differences between a CELTA and a DELTA, and why these are so highly regarded? These are like everywhere you go in the world where English is taught. Everybody knows or talks about a CELTA and a DELTA. What's the difference between those two?
Okay, so the CELTA is, as I mentioned before, a course for teachers who have little or no experience. And here it is considered a level 1 teaching certification. It's a very intensive course. It's a 1-month course, but it has a practicum component to it. And the DELTA is for teachers who are experienced, and it's a course that they consider a diploma level course. CELTA is level 1 and DELTA is a level 7 in their chart, right? The DELTA,
Cambridge chart, sorry to interrupt you, but that's in the Cambridge chart. Okay.
And for Languages Canada, if you want to apply for a Languages Canada membership, it's, I don't know if it would be a 7, but it's a higher I believe it's a level.
3, right?
Yeah, there's 3 levels, and the DELTA or the TESOL diploma, which is the equivalent, is a level 3 status.
It's like it's what a master's would be as well.
Yeah.
Yes. So the DELTA is done in 3 different modules. The first module is an exam, and it's about approaches, about the systems and the skills of the language, assessment, and about language acquisition and language teaching. So it's a very theoretical module. You can do it, you can just take the exam, or you can prepare yourself. For every module, there is a preparation if you want to go to a center and prepare for it. And it usually takes about 3 months